Oh, yes!
Greetings, fellow exiles. Today I'd like to break down changes from a recent Darkest Dungeon 2 patch. This video will cover the Grave Robber. We're going to talk about each path, first reviewing the 1.0 and then the updated version. Our first path is the Wanderer, so we'll be referring to this character broadly and hitting the overtones here. The Grave Robber is a somewhat dependent character. She has low health and low damage on some of her core skills, offset by a high crit chance that is further heightened through combo, but she can't set up combo herself. She does good base damage with her repositioning moves, so she doesn't fit into a team as much as provide a point to build a team around, a team that can accommodate her dancing and provide combo setup and damage transfer. Almost every damage value available to the Grave Robber has improved with this patch, with some skills also gaining crit chance and utility on their upgrades and on critical hits. This reflects an updated design philosophy about Wanderer paths. Previously, you would need a non-Wanderer path in order to elevate skills up to the standard of play, but increasing the baselines can make the Wanderer path viable itself without committing to one of the other paths. The threshold at which Absinthe applies a heal has been increased from 25% to 33%, so you won't be forced to get the character down to 5 HP before using this option. Flash of Daggers and Pirouette have new interactions with Stealth, though it will be difficult to access the Pirouette option through the Wanderer's Shadow Fade, their most reliable stealth skill, because using Shadow Fade is going to put the character out of the launch ranks for Pirouette, and overall the two skills share the same movement purpose, so you're less likely to want to run both at a time. There are other paths that can play better with this synergy. On the Wanderer path, you're not going to get this use of Pirouette unless you have a comp that can reshuffle the character towards the front, or you have another means of accessing stealth. Flash of Daggers Plus will now ignore dodge while stealthed, which could turn out useful against spiders or hounds if you can get into stealth while you're dealing with a stack of spiders that still have all their defensive tokens. It's hard to feel good about stealth in Darkest Dungeon 2 1.0 because it provides somewhat less reliable redirection than taunt and no protection from cleaving attacks. You can't provide stealth to an ally the way you can sometimes provide block or dodge through things like the Seraph, and most skills that provide stealth provide fewer tokens overall than comparable taunt or protect skills. Skills that create a taunt are likely to give retaliate or block, and a lot of the skills that provide stealth only provide stealth. Until now, the updated Shadow Fade Plus provides a strength token rather than a speed token, making it a better part of a rotation, making it less punishing when you need to shift the character back to the back line. The Wanderer Grave Robber certainly does more damage, but the 1.0 version of the Wanderer was a wet noodle. Looking at the other paths, I don't think there's a particular reason to pick Wanderer as of the new patch, but if you're stuck with a Wanderer because you don't have the ideal unlock, it will be less punishing. In 1.0, the Deadeye is something I would only pick if presented with a trait that improves critical or ranged attacks, but the improved baselines make it more generally viable. The crit chance on Flashing Daggers Plus is up to a whopping 30%, making this character a possible stress relief farm. The path has gained gimmicks on Absinthe and Repartee Plus that can further improve the character's crit chance, but these are situational and unlikely to have an impact outside of particularly long fights like Confession bosses. The best changed Deadeye is that it changes the targets of Flashing Dagger from 2-3 into a 3-4 backline cleave, improving performance of the skill against the Sleeping General, Seething Sigh, and the Body of Work, as well as some other fights with rank 4 priority targets. If you get a deadly Grave Robber, this path can really stand out, with your crit chance being something like 35 to 40% on your upgraded skills. There isn't a lot of variance or utility in the Deadeye's gameplay. You're mostly going to use the same 2 or 3 skills from the back ranks, and a skill to throw you back to the back ranks if you get pushed to the front. If you didn't try the 1.0 Nightsworn, you've been missing out. The stealth interaction for this path gives an enormous steroid that made Shadow Fade an appealing skill as part of a dancing rotation. The path has lost the blanket 50% damage buff, but that buff has been transplanted to Lunge, which was already your most damaging skill. The damage range on Lunge itself was nerfed, and the upgrade no longer ignores block, but it has gained Execution 1, and criticals with the skill also cause some knockback, which is also a change to the baseline on Lunge. Flashing Daggers has a bigger cleave and a cooldown on this path, but now requires stealth while you're in Nightsworn, making it an alternative damage skill that might be viable. It's cleaving 3 targets. That's pretty cool. Pirouette loses its penalties on this path and reduces its cooldown, so you can spam this a lot. It's an ideal follow-up to your Lunge. Most importantly, Repartee now defines the Nightsworn path, setting taunt on an ally and providing a multi-turn stealth buff that functions similarly to Last Stand's block generation on the Man-at-Arms. This is the first stealth skill I've ever felt actually looks efficient. The health penalty applied to this path has also been removed, making it a more stable contributor, less likely to get sent to death's door by a random cleave or errant dots. I think this stability and the new stealth synergy of Pirouette make this into the de facto grave robber path, but your team will need to accommodate some rank shuffling to make the most of it. While the speed penalty for playing Venomdrop could sometimes affect your damage curve, the overall problem with this path has been the overwhelming power of Venomdrop Flashing Daggers Plus, which is a little reined in this patch in the hopes that maybe you'll occasionally hit some other buttons. The blight bonus from stealth that was blanket on this path has been moved to specific skills, and those skills have gotten some further tuning so that you're not always clicking Flashing Daggers and Flashing Daggers Plus. The blight resistance piercing provided by Shadow Fade on this path has been dropped by 10% but lasts for an extra turn. I think that's more useful and more predictable, but I don't see myself getting my Venomdrop up to rank 1 or 2 on purpose so that it can use Shadow Fade. It's like a nice fallback effect. Absinthe gains the extra utility on this path of curing blight, or if upgraded, all dots. This should be useful in the theater especially, which you'll want to visit on any blight comps. Thrown Dagger Plus now applies weak if hitting a blighted target, giving the path some token interaction that might help blight comps endure bosses, so blight comps generally aren't very good at applying weak. I really appreciate bringing utility to a skill that would otherwise be completely dead within this path. Thrown Dagger also does more damage than before within the path. Not only has the path lost its blanket ranged damage penalty, but the baseline for Thrown Dagger is more similar to the Wanderer damage. Foreclosure Notice does not apply combo anymore or stealth, so you cannot solve the class by finding this trinket. Its new effects reward stealth and empower Shadow Fade to remove all negative tokens, which has a use across all of the paths, but does require that your robber is moving around or you'll only feel this benefit in a panic. This doesn't really help Deadeye deal with things like blind or other tokens you may need to react to. Although Shadow Fade can remove all tokens, you have to be in the ranks to launch Shadow Fade to feel good about that. His rings are reworked into 2 effects. The rings apply combo to attackers that miss you. You get 10% crit on pick to the face, and you get a relic bauble payout on Death of Night. I really like it when you have combat actions that can be optimized to get resources for the run like this. That's part of why the stress layer is fun and interesting. The previous version of his rings was very Venomdrop specific, but this version is useful in almost any path. Stiff Drink was reworked into a weaker version of the 1.0 of his rings, but it's no longer range specific, so it can work more broadly if you're working with lunge or pick to the face. The reworked trinkets are overall less narrow, more broadly applicable, but the 1.0 trinkets were definitely stronger. Notably, the Nightsworn can actually play with these new upgraded trinkets. Every 1.0 trinket was somehow bad for the Nightsworn. The higher baselines and stronger Deadeye should mean that the character needs less coddling to be valuable. Higher speed on Venomdrop is noteworthy, and I'm glad to have any reason to click different buttons on that build. It was very boring. The skills that provide stealth are better, but I don't see myself leaning on stealth outside of Nightsworn. If you get a trait, trinket, or combat item that can enable stealth without setup, you have more uses for that now, and that's going to feel stronger if you get something like Shimmering Powder. That might be the wrong name for that combat item, if you get the Stealth Powder. The Deadeye is better for taking on the Sleeping General than before, but this patch has a slight nerf on the General's Dream that you should be aware of if you take that route. The Deadeye is a little worse than before at the Leviathan because you can't cleave the head and hand at the same time, but I couldn't think of another fight where a 2-3 cleave is preferable to a 3-4 cleave. Some specific token interactions might help the character cope with Ravenous Reach, but not to an extent that I would recommend this character for the purpose of beating Chapter 4 if that boss is getting you stuck. Some of the repartee interactions continue to suggest a dodge tanking idea that might be more appealing with the Absinthe buffs, except that the character still has low HP and no access to block, very little access to weakness, and I'm not a fan of gambling away runs. The Runaway is still a solid partner for the character with their ability to apply blind and combo and to dance alongside them. If you want to try for this kind of dodge interaction, you should be incorporating blinds and weakness to add more defensive layers. I think the best use of these interactions is when you know that a full party attack is incoming, and you can glean a little benefit if that attack happens to miss because of your dodge, but it's not going to be your primary strategy. The fact that these buffs, when they do trigger, still last for a pretty short time is very underwhelming compared to some of the power of the First Order optimal strategies in the game. The change that interests me the most about the character is the Nightsworn's repartee buff, because you can use it to set up redirection onto a character that may not ordinarily have taunt access, like the Highwayman, giving him a much stronger enabler for his riposte skills. My next video will talk about the Highwayman changes this patch, and you may note that this idea has stronger legs than it once did. If you appreciate the Darkest Dungeon content, let me know in the comments. I enjoy the game, but the length of runs can make it really difficult to schedule. I need to know if people are invested in this in order for me to keep plonking away at it. But there are more challenge flames now, so we can do a number of interesting challenge runs.